We have had demonstrations against the government. There have been voices. There was some violence saying that we want the monarchy back.
I have no hesitation telling that if there is one phenomena very transparent in Nepal, that's corruption. Earlier people would say, oh, the people at the top are corrupt. But now that's not the case. Every day, cases of corruption at the world level, the lowest level of decentralized system, which is equivalent of panchayats in India, they are indulging in huge corruption. And the people's dissatisfaction is growing by day. Democracy is just not a mere kind of word. It has to be certain norms, way of life, way of governance. They have created a group that is immune from any investigation. They are above law. This is a totalitarian and totally authoritarian regime in the country now. What I feel is in 2005-2006, India's concern about peace in Nepal was justified, but bringing Maoist and 7 political parties together against the anti-monarchy platform, in a way responsible for the current mess.
Unemployment rate has touched 12.5%. That's nearly 13% in Nepal. Now that is a very serious situation. How do you view that?
Change took place in the background of a decade-long insurgency led by the Maoists, in which about 17,000 people lost their life, and most of them were youths.
Yeah.
Also affected industries, tourism and other industries in a big way. So on an average, around 500,000 youths leave the country every year.
500,000 is about 5 lakh people. Yes. You can say.
In July, when the two parties issued, like a joint statement saying we have decided to form the government midnight, Prachanda was heading the government, supported by UML at that point of time. He had a meeting with Oli just 3 hours before that, before midnight, and said, "Comrade, don't worry. We'll go to the hell and heaven together. We are going to be in the government together."
One of them certainly went to hell.
Yeah.
Now, India's interest is, of course, to tell Nepal that, okay, you don't do a balancing act. You have to be pro-India. And then that leads to a lot of, pushback as far as Nepal is concerned. I mean, how do you interpret that?
Oli was in a hurry to become the prime minister, for which the promulgation of the constitution was one single condition. So they had to meet that condition. September 20. 2 days before that, India's foreign secretary then, who is now the foreign minister, came and said, no, you need to reserve the issues raised by the Tarai parties. Obviously, political parties saw it as interference, and when constitution was promulgated 2 days later, India reacted by economic blockade, which continued nearly 4 months plus.
With all this generational connect, why is there so much of, distrust between the two people? Welcome to Arjun Bhagat Decodes, or AB Decodes, where we talk about geopolitics, where we talk about India and its neighbors and the world in large. Today we have a very, very special guest with us. We have Yubaraj Ghimire, one of the leading journalists of Nepal, someone who who's not afraid to speak his mind. He was also arrested by the monarch, the king of Nepal, for airing his views against the monarchy and about other political issues at that point of time. Mr. Ghimire is a journalist who has also worked closely on the narrative between India and Nepal. He's covered political events, social events. He's worked for The Outlook, for India Today, for Indian Express, been a regular contributor. So welcome to AB Decodes, Mr. Ghimire. What a pleasure it is to speak to you on such an important subject, where I really want to cover, politics in Nepal, understand what's happening in Nepal, but also, later on talk about India-Nepal relations, because, that is of course interest to us. But at the same time, there are a lot of Indians, there are a lot of Nepalis, there are a lot of people who really want to understand what's going on in Nepal. Just to give a background to some of the listeners, to the viewers, yeah, it is a federal democratic state. It became a democracy in 2007, 2008. Um, and since then, and that's my first question to you, we've had something like 12 or 13 prime ministers since 2008, and three of whom have, taken turns as prime ministers three times.
Yes.
Uh, and you have three main political parties. You have the Nepali Congress, you have the Nepal Communist Party or the UML, and you have the Nepal Communist Party, a Maoist Center, which is headed by Prachanda. And I think for the first time in the history of Nepal, you have the Nepal Communist Party, the UML, which is in partnership with the opposition, which is the Nepali Congress, to give KP Oli the prime ministership and to keep Prachanda out. So, what's going on with the politics of Nepal at this present state? Make sense of that for us, please.
Thank you, Arjun. Yes, currently this parliament five-year tenure aims in 2027 December, and what we've seen in this, after July is two biggest party. It's a hung parliament. Two biggest party is Nepali Congress, and the number two is Communist Party of Nepal, UML, that is United Marxist Leninist. They together have the smaller one leads the government. So this itself is an aberration in the sense that second party should ideally be sitting in the opposition unless they are pre-election coalition partner. But it was politics purely driven by quest for power. They came together on an understanding that the first half, after July, remaining tenure of parliament, the first half would be headed, the government would be headed by the UML, that's KP Oli, and second half by Duba. Otherwise, there are not much principles and common minimum programs the two parties together charted out while assuming power. But again, it's not why I'm saying it's not a principled alliance is before that, Maoist, which was the third largest party, meaning like if the Nepali Congress is somewhere around 88, UML is 80, Nepali Congress is far down to 32 seats. But it was the Maoist party which headed the government, supported by two parties, but then Maoist kept changing its supporting parties. And ultimately it was replaced by UML Nepali Congress coalition. That's where it is. And the parties are now facing, it's in a different context, but general, hesitation by the people for their poll delivery, corruption, and of course there are other political parties which we'll discuss later.
Right. So, if I look at the situation in Nepal right now, in fact, I was reading a post today which I read in the Kathmandu Post, and it basically says that unemployment rate has touched 12.5%. That's nearly 13% in Nepal. Now, that is a very serious situation. How do you view that? You talked about corruption, you talked about policies. So, why are things going down so much economically?
Well, unfortunately, this is, like after the 2005-6 political changes, people were very hopeful, especially the youths, because, this change took place in the background of a decade-long insurgency led by the Maoist, in which about 17,000 people lost their life, and most of them were youths.
Yeah.
And they thought that after the political changes, it will be people's government. They will be doing much more for the youths who were leaving the country for Gulf Gulf countries and then US, and depending on what you are going for there, education or labors and all that. So, but they didn't see the future in Nepal. They didn't see their future in Nepal because the political parties didn't make their future the priority. So, on an average, around 500,000 youths leave the country every year.
500,000 is about 5 lakh people.
Yes.
You can say. So in the larger context, I just want to explain to some of the viewers is that Nepal has a population of about 3 crores.
That's right.
3 crores, which is, it's a very small population. And you have 5 lakh youth. And youth are the main resource of any country. And they are keeping the country for better opportunities because obviously there are not enough jobs or high quality jobs or to meet their aspirations.
Yeah, but this flight of youth has other implications also, because the country is left with children or aging population. Because during the insurgency, new phenomena began because rural sides were far more insecure, and they would leave their places to relatively safer places, to nearby urban areas, or those who could afford would come to Kathmandu, or the others would leave the country. So it badly affected the agriculture pattern. Although Nepal's majority population depends on agriculture still.
Right.
Maoist insurgency also affected industries, tourism, and other industries in a big way, because because of the situation of violence, and they're disrupting these industries. So, and there are a lot of infrastructure which is destroyed, like bridges, telecommunication towers, and all that. This really put Nepal quite, backward economically in terms of, industrial production, youth employment. Even those existing employment started receding, and the safer destination became countries abroad. And that continues even after the Maoists came to the peace and democratic process, leading the government, or dictating the government agenda. That continues. That's why now one reason why there's not much militant protest is because youths are not there.
Right.
Second is because the successive regimes have become so corrupt that I have no hesitation telling that if there is one phenomena very transparent in Nepal, that's corruption. And worse, Nepal, that corruption is also decentralized, in the sense that, earlier people would say, oh, the people at the top are corrupt. But now that's not the case. Every day, cases of corruption at the world level, the lowest level of decentralized system, which is equivalent of panchayats in India, they are indulging in huge corruption. And the people's dissatisfaction is growing by day.
So then, what you're saying to me is, if I would interpret what you're saying is that democracy has still not found its feet. I wouldn't say democracy has been defeated, but it hasn't found its feet as far as Nepal is concerned.
First, I think democracy is the most acceptable political system in the world today.
Right.
Democracy is also a way of life, and there are certain, fundamental features for any political system to be qualified as democracy. Executive not being accountable to the people in parliament, country not having an independent judiciary in the sense that judiciary is packed with party cadres. That is basically antithesis of democracy, but unfortunately, these are what are being practiced in the name of democracy in Nepal. And third is, leaders, the set of leaders, top leaders of any 7 or 8 major political parties Before that, let me say this way. After 2005-6 political change, three parties have been heading the government. They're unstable, but these three parties, Maoist, Congress, and UML. And except what,
It's like merry-go-round, or it's like, yes.
yeah, except one 11-month period after 2010, in which, because the first constituent assembly couldn't prepare the constitution, so they decided to elect the second constituent assembly. Again, this is something that hasn't happened anywhere in the world. Sitting chief justice of the Supreme Court, headed a coalition government that was joined by four major political parties. That government was in place for 11 months, including during the time of elections. But the other basis was the principle of separation of power was totally, abandoned when you had a chief justice heading a coalition government with the political parties. That has really ruined the reputation and credibility of the judiciary in Nepal, along with that of the political parties. So after 2006, three parties, except one, chief justice regime, they have been alternating in the leadership, but the composition is the same, more or less. And during the past 10 years, after the constitution was promulgated in September 2015, three people are rotating. They belong to the same parties, but Prachanda, KP Oli, and Deuba, they are rotating.
It has been Prime Minister, if I'm not wrong, 3 times each.
Yes. So what I'm saying is, there are leaders who have been, of course, in democracy, one who is elected majority rules. But here it's not even the leaders who have got majority. They are rotating in power. They have been tested, and people's presumption is they have failed. So current round of agitation, I am sure we'll be discussing it,
Yes.
is largely because of these counterproductive phrases they are heading the government without, much common agenda for the people.
Right. So let's talk about the current situation. We have had demonstrations against the government. There have been voices. There was some violence saying that we want the monarchy back. It seems that the people are a little desperate to get some sort of a stability. But then, on the other hand, wouldn't you blame the people themselves for the situation they're in? Because every time you vote minority governments into power, um, who else can you blame but yourself?
Yes. No, partly, definitely, in democracy, the government is there because people have given the mandate that way. Obviously, but here there were also occasions like in 2017 elections when the communist parties got two-third majority in parliament,
Well,
but that party also split, and they couldn't perform. They were replaced. When political parties come around to the opinion that we need prosperity, because when 2005 2006 political change took place, the eight political parties together under a uh, peace under a agreement that was mediated by the government of India,
right.
it said they will ensure that Nepal has peace, stability, consolidation of democracy, and economic prosperity. But then down the line, 18 years onwards, we haven't seen that kind of any of that promise being fulfilled. So basically, the political leadership, which wants absolute power, doesn't want to be ruling on the system, like on the principle of accountability to people or people's representative body. And they create a of group immune from any investigation into corruption cases. This is what has happened. So when we talk about democracy, democracy is just not a mere kind of world, it has to be certain norms, way of life, way of governance, and citizenry also has to be governed by that. But political parties, I must say, they haven't followed any of these principles. They have created a group that is immune from any investigation. They are above law.
Right.
This is a totalitarian and totally authoritarian regime in the country now.
Now, I mean, I can understand what you're saying because if the three parties are sharing power or supporting each other over long periods of time, why would they launch an investigation or its other partner? Because you never know who the other partner or when that partner is
Yes.
putting you in government, right? So just to get a little bit of an understanding, you talked about the pillars of democracy just now, sir. You talked about the judiciary. You said it's compromised. The executive is not listening to the legislature. The legislature is looking after its self-interest. I mean, that's a story of other places as well. I mean, I wouldn't single Nepal out, and I know you wouldn't single, but the situation is dire right now in Nepal. This present government of KP Oli, supported by the Congress, how do you see it? I mean, you said there may be a change in the leadership. Um, is that a possibility of happening soon? And is there a common minimum, program of these two parties to say, okay, these are the four areas that we are going to work on and make life better for our Nepali citizens?
It was very, very difficult to make any prediction in Nepal because I really don't know whether they are the real actors. In July, when the two parties issued, like a joint statement saying we have decided to form the government midnight, Prachanda was heading the government supported by UML at that point of time. And according to Prachanda, he's made it, he said it publicly and also in parliament. He said, he had a meeting with Woli just 3 hours before that, before midnight, and said, "Comrade, don't worry. We'll go to the hell and heaven together. We are going to be in the government together."
One of them certainly went to hell.
Yeah. So 3 hours later, then the composition of the would-be government, which took oath next day, was different. So when such deals are made midnight, we really don't know what the parts of the deals are, you know. So this was, but one thing we can say is it's a very power-centric deal. So the only known deal was remaining tenure of parliament. Maybe it was 4 years or a little less than that. First half of the remaining tenure would be the government headed by Oli. Then he would hand over the leadership to Duba. Party doesn't figure there. It was a midnight deal between the two leaders or four leaders, but party doesn't figure there. People's need and program doesn't figure there. So this is how political equations have changed in Nepal. This is how governments have changed in Nepal. We really don't know what happens.
So basically, what we are saying is that the individual's interest is far above the interest of the nation, and that puts in jeopardy any political system, be it Nepal or some other country. I mean, we are seeing things happen in Pakistan as well. A very unstable situation right now. It's been going on for some years now. But of course, there's no comparison between Nepal and Pakistan. I want to make, I want to stress on that. There is no, but there is political instability. There is economic stability as a result. Um, my question is that in this case, what is the recourse? I mean, you can't change the politics overnight.
Yeah.
You can't, and there are, as I said, some groups asking for the monarchy, the former king Ganendra, to be reinstated. But I don't know how serious that is because democracy is still actually is vibrant. I mean, yes, there's a lot of confusion, but people, elections are being held. There's Panchayati Raj, so it is robust, but it is going in all sorts of direction.
Well, I'll go a little bit into the background of this instability, we currently, yes, as you see it by the rate of change of the government and people's protest, there's no political instability. Political instability is not a bad thing in evolving democracy, but Nepal has a track record of you know uh, having been witness to 7 constitutions in as many decades. So the reason being is not that constitution, any constitution is flexible document, you can amend it. But the narratives Nepal's leaders made was, if my leadership, my government fails, it is not because I'm a poor performer, because the constitution is not adequate. So that, and they have amended this constitution, and they are very intolerant to the dissent. We'll come to KP Oli. That's a new record he set towards intolerance, which is again antithesis of democracy. But in 2005-6, when political change took place, Nepal had been through a decade-long insurgency. I told you, 17,000 people lost their lives. Very tragic. And peace process began. Nepal was a unique experiment on the peace process, as it left one major side or party to the conflict, that was monarchy and previous rulers. They didn't include them in the peace process. I mean, what I'm saying is, supposing Nelson Mandela had said in South Africa, look, I'll have nothing to do with this apartheid, pro-apartheid people. Why should I include them in the interim government or peace process? Like, that's exactly what he didn't do, what he hated doing in South Africa. Nepal's democratic leaders and Maoists did. They totally excluded. And this, in international community, including UN, was party to this. And my own, although India was worried about the ongoing conflict with Nepal, thinking that this may have a spillover effect, rightly, on its side, India did play a major role in bringing the political parties, including Maoists, together, although it had called Maoist terrorist force. There was a moderate force. Democracy, after all, is also a system that accommodates every viewpoint.
Right, absolutely.
We criticize the king when he took over and excluded political parties, but political parties did the same.
You were a major voice against that. You were imprisoned because of that.
Yes. Yeah, although I'll correct one thing, I was arrested by GP Koirala's government because I printed an article by Baburam Bhattrai, who was a Maoist leader, and on the record of the Indian establishment, he was a terrorist. But the point is, why I chose to print it was, as a journalist, as a media person, I cannot be excluding any viewpoint, although I would not be agreeing with everything or most of the things he said there. Second was, in order to bring the conflicting parties together,
Right.
you need to be a platform for dissemination of their viewpoint, and know that weapons. Yeah, so that weapons are put in disuse and opinions and negotiation matters. But that, while I was arrested and with charged for sedition and all that, the Maoists and other parties, when they came to power, they did exactly the same thing in a bigger scale.
Right.
That's why this, so far, the peace record was signed in 2006 November.
Yes.
So far, the transitional justice, which was supposed to have been concluded in 2 years, so after that, it hasn't been anywhere. Not even the proper law has been framed about the jurisdiction of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and all that. So this is a complete dishonesty of the parties, mainly the Maoist and two other parties, as they think that, in order to be able to rule, they need not, they should avoid holding any side guilty for human right violation.
Right. So you talked about Prime Minister KP Oli. You talked about the fact that in some ways it's resembling an authoritarian kind of a regime. People can't really dissent, talk about it. Explain that part to us, because that's something that one doesn't really hear about.
Yeah.
How do you exemplify that?
Yeah. It's a very interesting question, Arjunji. I think, whenever KP Olis become prime minister, although in the kind of system that we have adopted, prime minister is always powerful. But what he did was he brought all the investigating agencies of the state, intelligence agencies, Department of Revenue Intelligence, these property, there's something called Sampati Suddhikaran, basically, like the,
Should be done right.
or yeah. He's brought all these investigating agencies under his, direct command. And there is allegation, some of them are, evidently clear that he's used these agencies against his political rights. One, he's
Including
openly said, he's, he's openly asked judges of, warned the judges of the Supreme Court or other courts that you have to look into a career now and after you retire. This is a direct threat. And third, I'll tell you, recently on the 20th of March, there was this huge rally by pro-monarchy elements. The government used excessive force, including use of tear gas shells without any provocation, and it used outdated or date expired bullets. A fact that it had concealed, but thanks to social media and media, it was brought out to the public knowledge 3 or 4 days later. Two people died, they were killed. And Oli, just 2 days before that, had given an open call to Yuva Sangh, that is youth wing of his party, to leap, against the people talking against republic, and you behave them like tigers to their prey. That was the message it given. And after all these atrocities, there is demand from all sides, not only those who participated in the movement, but also from the media, from human rights groups and all that. Now, UNESCO Secretary General has also spoken. For a judicial inquiry, he is reluctant to, concede it. Although from Parliament, protected for walls of Parliament, he said former king is guilty and he will be brought to justice. Fine. If his guilt is proved after investigation, that is, he is entitled to do that. But the point is using that privileged for wall, not accepting the demand for excessive use of force, that took toll of human lives.
right.
And there is another case of a former deputy prime minister, this is the fourth largest party's chairman. He was accused of indulging in corruption or certain irregularities in the cooperative sector.
And that's the
Ravi Lavi
the Rashtra Swatantra Party.
Yeah, Ravi Lavi decided. Oli said, and when Congress party's members in parliament said, no, there are certain allegations against him that must be proved, Oli said he is innocent. And Oli included him in his cabinet. In the government that he supported, he was a coalition partner. Already was not the prime minister. It was Prasanna who was the prime minister. And now that person has been hauled up in that case because they fell out. Only and they fell out. And also I want to add, on that March 20th rally, when such an excessive force was used by the government, those protesters, leaders were protested. Some leaders were arrested. They are produced in the court in handcuff. criminalizing dissent is a very, very heavy price that might have on democracy, and Oli is leading that, like campaign.
So, would you say that you're afraid, or civil rights groups are afraid that the former king may be arrested in this case?
Well, he has said that Parliament, and when there is no norm that guides the government, when it depends at the whims of a prime minister, of a leader, about who is guilty and who is not. Anything is possible, but I think that will backfire. That will be a very unfortunate thing to happen.
Right. So, very quickly, sir, I really want to talk about India-Nepal relations as well. Um, in such a situation where there's so much of turmoil, do you think that the military might step in, or are we getting ahead of ourselves? Because then the role of the military, the army has always been very benign as far as Nepal is being concerned. It's not something the army is not like the Pakistani army or.
That's true. That's true. Army has been really perhaps the only state-bearing institution after the end of the monarchy. They behave very well, although they are instigated and criticized for being the army, partial army of the king. They behave very well. But if a situation arises that law and order, my understanding is army has warned against excessive humiliation and arrest of the former king. This is like not a very confirmed but credible information. But if yeah, but if Nepal army tomorrow realizes the government is discredited, the parties are discredited, and they are not accountable to parliament, and if the step that the government take encourage total collapse and deterioration in the law and order situation, the ultimate blame for any excess would fall on the army, and perhaps they would not want that. That's all I can say at the moment.
Right. No, that's that gives us a good perspective. Let's move to India-Nepal relations. India as a country, we have I don't know, thousands of years of contact with each other. It goes between its linguistic traditions, it is marital traditions, it's the religion, it's the culture.
Yeah.
I mean, in one way, we are really, really close to each other. I would want to stress are very different. And that is something that the Indian population needs to understand, because there is a lot of confusion about that in the Indian narrative sometimes, and also the political narrative. Nepal has always been independent. It has a strong identity. With all this generational connect, whether it is the religion where the Nepalis come to Varanasi, and or the Indians go and pray at some of the most sacred destinations, pilgrimages in Nepal. It's been going on for generations. Why is there so much of distrust between the two people?
There are certain perception, there are certain realities. Sometimes perceptions are high beyond reality, perhaps. You mentioned about what binds Nepal and India together, civilizational thing. It was open border, although regulated, understandably, because like crimes and this thing. The open border. There are like people of the same faith having common pilgrimage. This side and that side, to the extent that like there are most bigger, like Hindu shrines would give access to the sanctum sanctorum along with the Sankaracharya of that area plus head priest of those shrines and Nepal king in India. They were followed.
Practice. It's still practice.
Yeah, followed very regularly whenever the kings would visit there. Like under the system of Sankaracharya, Nepal will fall under the jurisdiction of Puri Sankaracharya on religious issues. Uh, it was not a colonial setup. It was just a people. I mean, just faith that brought the two sides together. Yes, in governance, there have been occasionally ups and downs. Nepal has suffered blockade 2-3 times for various political reasons. In 1947, when India became independent, Nepal had another kind of politics going on. There were the kings, but there was just the figureheads in the sense that another parallel dynasty had, appropriated all power. Many Nepali leaders participated in India's freedom movement. Right. And they also wanted to set up democracy and settle this monarchy issue. So, king at that time, Tribhuvan, sided with the pro-democracy political parties, and they together decided to carve out their own political, system where people's representatives rule and monarchy also gets a space. Like there are monarchies, democracy. So it's not contradictory to each other. They're just, but when India became independent, it was that, like a republic setup. Those Raja and, this thing, they have been abolished. And when British left, it was a republic India. So so this is a new feature that has also been bone of contention at times. Political parties accuse the king of trying to, going against that understanding and appropriating power. And king has certain reservation about it. But anyway, Nepali Congress has now become much closer to the Maoist and Republic thing. But these are the backgrounds. So what I'm saying is, one is uh, at times, what Nepalese complaint is about the arrogance of Indian bureaucracy at times, and what Indian side complains is servility of the Nepali side. They don't talk about anything, talk about things openly, about the problems openly, but then they blame India for things going wrong. But what I feel is in 2005, 2006, India's concern about peace in Nepal was justified, but bringing Maoist and seven political parties together against the anti-monarchy, in the anti-monarchy platform, without giving the Nepali people to debate and discuss and decide, is in a way responsible for the current mess. What happened after the sudden exit of the monarchy, without thinking what consequences it might bring to Nepal, was it invited China's presence, because when India sought international endorsement of its republic agenda, Western countries also taken into confidence and they increased their presence in Nepal, which made China very suspicious. Why? We've always accepted India's primacy of role and interest in Nepal, but why Western forces? Right. Like they, Tibet being their soft belly. So they increased their presence and investment in Nepal. 6 years in a row, FDI from China is the highest. And for protection of its own business interest, economic interest, security interest, now China needs a favorable regime. So, China is at times, like I told you, they brought two communist parties together. They are still keen that, this Nepali Congress, they don't trust much. Monarchy, left unity is always popular than any other kind of change.
What you're basically saying is that, when India brought together all the political parties, um, there should have been a space for the king. After all,
Yes.
he's revered as, in a way, as a god, if I'm correct. And that was also a binding factor in within Nepal. And if the sprat was torn away, and he was not even allowed to be a symbolic head, maybe that would have, brought the country together. I don't know about that. But as far as the Maoist parties are concerned and China's influence, I think China's influence went much beyond that, because China pretty much funded the Maoists. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had Prachanda actually living in China for a long time before that.
No. As I told you, India supported them, in fact, politically. Despite India supporting it, Maoist worldview is very well known. They are their worldview is anti-America, anti-India, and pro-China. It looks like in the given situation, Prachanda and Bauram Bhattarai might be obliged to India for the support they got, but the party's global, like the worldview is definitely different.
Many of them have actually studied in India and all that. I agree.
Yeah.
I think I think it's pretty clear that the Chinese started influencing a lot of the underground leaders right from the 80s into the 90s, especially after the king, and there was a massacre which happened in 2001. I think they got a real foothold within Nepal, and as you said, they are now the largest investors in Nepal for the last few years. um, China is, putting in its economic might to incent, yeah, so as to say. Now, India's interest is, of course, to tell Nepal that, okay, don't do a balancing act. You have to be pro-India. Um, and then that leads to a lot of, pushback as far as Nepal is concerned. I mean, how do you interpret that?
In fact, Arjunji, from through your program, let me explain it this way. Where like political parties went on a mass protest when the king took over in 2005 February. Then king felt, like ultimately conceded to their demands, handed over power to the political parties, and revived parliament that had, without any debate, announced that hence from today Nepal would be a secular country. We really don't know what it means. Without it was such a, major issue. Why would Hindu Nepal be declared in that manner a secular country? What is the relation between, like interrelation between the state and religion, individuals' role, and all that? Nothing of the sort was discussed. And when the Constituent Assembly was discussed, when Constituent was elected, Constituent Assembly was also Parliament. It was like in 2014 May, Narendra Modi and BJP came to power. Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister. It was like after when the Parliament was constituted on its first day, Manmohan Singh going and declaring that, dictating the agenda. It was like that.
Right.
Absolute in that euphoric moment, everything that is not allowed democratically, conventionally happened. That's why things are so shaky. Anyone can do anything. Nepal became federal. Now, Oli is the only prime minister who goes to different provincial legislature and addresses there. And the autonomy of those parliaments and rules, they're totally, depends on the whims of one leader. Now, others would do the same thing.
Let me just move to my next question. KP Oli recently met Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Bangkok. That meeting actually took place after quite some time. He hasn't visited Nepal. The Prime Minister of India, though now he's been in power for 11 years, has not visited Nepal for many, many years. The relations between uh, India and Nepal, as far as Prime Minister Narendra Modi is concerned, were pretty good till 2017. And that was when Pioli was actually in power. And then things happened that the relationship went down. There was also a blockade that took place.
Yeah.
This entire mistrust and Mr. Oli's stance towards India of not being too friendly uh, is not really helping either country, is it?
One, Modi, when became the prime minister in 2014, he's visited his visit to Nepal within the first 3 months, and then subsequent visit for, I think it was Bimsteak or something, or yeah, Shark, sorry, Shark. Well, it was very cordial, and like people expected that because India's prime minister hadn't visited Nepal for 17 years in a row, except when Atal Vajpayee came in the Shark. They were very happy about like the relation being uh, uh, a matter of concern at the top level. But then suddenly this 2015 came when Nepal was hit badly by the earthquake.
Yes.
And India was the first to send its air force for rescue in a relief operation. Quite appreciated it.
Right.
But then in 2015, bilateral or multilateral understanding among the leaders would dictate the political agenda. What Koirala and Oli decided was, after let's promulgate the constitution as soon as possible under the leadership of the Nepali Congress Prime Minister. Then immediately after that, Oli takes over, and and he holds the first election under the constitution. That was the understanding. Although from humanitarian perspective, a country ravaged by earthquake with so many loss of life and property would not think about the elections. you know. So, but Woli was, because Woli and Sushil Koirala had already decided, Woli was in a hurry to become the prime minister, for which the promulgation of the constitution was one single condition. So they had to meet that condition September 20. 2 days before that, India's foreign secretary then, who is now the foreign minister, came and said, no, you need to reserve the issues raised by the Tarai parties. That is another aspect. In fact, Indo-Nepal relation, we'll talk about it also. Obviously, political parties saw it as interference. Why would a bureaucrat, although mandated by his prime minister, come and try to stall the constitution making process? That really, became an issue. And when constitution was promulgated 2 days later, India reacted by, going for economic blockade, which continued nearly 4 months plus. So that soured the relation. The Oli was in hurry to be prime minister, although that India's what India did was not acceptable to Nepal, but the response could have been milder. But Oli was very determined to become the prime minister as soon as possible. But then what Oli did got wider support in Nepal. He thought that depending on India on the train and transit alone for access to the sea is not right at the time of crisis. He signed deal with the China for the first time. Although Chinese port from Kathmandu is about 3,000 kilometers away, it may not be practical, but he got the support of the people. Then that trust level between Modi and Oli perhaps never got restored. And then this border issue came up. The new map, India and Nepal. But I'll understand that also, because the border dispute always arises between two countries, two neighboring countries, and there are ways to sort it out. It hasn't happened. It hasn't moved further. Third is, like it began. This conversation began about Prime Minister Oli and Prime Minister Modi's meeting in Bangkok. It was the first meeting in the sidelines of a global event, let's say a regional event here. Earlier, it was in New York in September, sidelines of the UN General Assembly. We have some information about what bilateral issues were debated, India's, willingness to support Nepal and all that. But we believe that there are certain things which came up which have not been officially confirmed yet. That was Prime Minister Modi's concern about the situation happening in Nepal.
Right.
Prime Minister Modi's concern about fast conversion because in Nepal, the secular, way to practice religion is also allowing conversion
Right.
in a big way. Uh, to Nepal is supposed to be one of the fastest converting country at the moment. That has resentment at local level because the perception is it's not out of free will. And third is
Certain money, monetary incentives are being given for conversion.
yeah, that is the general perception belief, and yeah. So these are issues. We have seen some response in the Indo-Bangladesh, relation after Bangkok meeting, but we really don't know, the outcome that way. Although it seemed that Oli was not very happy with the meeting, and he said it in a like a meeting of Nepal's. Other thing is about like Tarai, when Mr. Jaishankar came with a suggestion that uh, issues raised by the Tarai or
Great parties. So to explain for the audience about the Tarai issue. The population, the political parties, the Tarai is the area which borders India, moves from the Gorakhpur side all the way down it goes. And
that's right.
from India's perspective, from Uttar Pradesh to all parts of, yeah. So if you could explain that, because it's important.
Yeah, Arjunji, yeah, this is like this. Nepal geographically is divided into three, this thing is the Himalayas, and then the mid hills, mountain region, then the plain, Tarai. Plains, like it's congruous to Indian side, about 1850 kilometer border, it says 1850 kilometer border with India, with free, I mean, of course, like this free movement is open border is still there. And on the north side, it's China, about 1400 kilometer border it says, but it's a very difficult kind of terrain. And Tarai population is about 51% of the total population, 30 million you told right at the beginning. One narrow narrative in India is नेपाल के साथ हमारा रोटी बेटी का संबंध है. Although it's expanding, that's true, but this relation is expanding. But Tarai is also very diverse. There are people who are indigenous from there. There are castes which are common, like in Bihar, UP, like there are Yadav, there are Queries, there are Kurmis, but they are Nepali, this thing, and there are indigenous population like Tharus, Rajbansis, and all that. And for economic reasons, there are people who have migrated from the hills to Tarai. For economic reasons, there are people who have migrated from erstwhile Bihar and UP. Now it's become other states also. So, and there is internal rivalry also. But India at times sends across a message that the entire Tarai population is Indian origin, which is, I think, sociologically, culturally not true. I'll give you one example. Nepal and India were not in that shape earlier. It's a Ramayana era civilization. We have Janakpur,
Yes.
huge territory, Mithila, Tirut in India, like it touches UP, Bihar. Now that palace of Janak is falls in Nepal, today's Nepal. So who do you call? This side of the population is Indian origin, or that side of the population is Nepal origin? The truth is we have common heritage. We have common heritage. We have a common culture that binds us together. This should be an issue to cement the relation, not as division. Like so that is where India goes wrong, and Nepalese, the local population, like differ. And this wrong narrative should not be diplomacy and part of diplomacy. That's all I wanted to add in that. But anyway, there are many commonalities, intermarriages. India and Nepal's trade, 70% of the trade, cooperation, India has been a like very old contributor to Nepal's development, its connectivity to mostly in India, and also connectivity of Nepal from one side to another. So India contribution is huge. But then what?
Question about that. I mean, we
Yeah,
economically, politically. I mean, one example is that, like the European Union, or if you're a part of the European Union, all the people can go and work in that particular area. Nepal is the same way. A lot of Nepalis from here, many Indians go to Nepal to make a life.
and also one factor I forget to mention was Gorkha. Gorkha have been part of India's security, and when Modi is by Rajnath Singh as defense minister, they came to Nepal. They repeated one thing, that there is no war that India has won without Gorkhas sending blood. But but I won't say it is right or wrong, but that as per the Agniveer scheme, Gorkha recruitment is now stopped. So what I'm saying is one major contributing factor to Nepal-India relation would be that chapter, maybe of history soon.
But recently, if I'm right, I think the army chief had gone to Indian army chief had gone to Nepal, and it actually said restart the we want to restart the recruitment. But it's actually the Nepali government which is saying that no, Agniveer doesn't suit our soldiers. Is that? I mean, can you clarify that?
Yeah, as as per my information knowledge, what happened was after the Agniveer scheme was introduced, they would be recruited for 4 years, and all these regional armies or identity-based armies would be dismantled. So Gorkha would not be different.
Right.
So then, when they came for recruitment, Nepal government didn't cooperate, and Nepal government's stance was India has unilaterally, like terminated one understanding. So we'd not be, cooperating in that. That's where it is, I think. But Indian Army and Nepal Army's institutional relations are very old and still very cordial. And the chief of one army becomes the honorary general of the other army on reciprocal basis. That arrangement continues.
One of the predicaments is whenever there is instability in Nepal, political instability, or the prime minister is in a bit of a precarious situation, which clearly KP Oli is right now, India becomes the favorite whipping boy.
When differences arise between the two friendly countries, we have common future in many respects. It's all for the diplomatic channels, to sort it out. And what has happened, what we have seen in the past is when relations have gone, downhill, or there are sign of some, like aberrations. I've seen, especially from Indian side, that seasoned, mature political figures have been sent as diplomats,
Right.
and they have um, addressed the issues very effectively. But 2005-6, I don't know. One part was peace. India's role for peace would have been appreciated if it was not mixed with deciding or lobbying international relations for what agenda Nepal should adopt. But these are things which, I mean, time should be healing, but diplomatic efforts should continue. And also, other impact is China's um, almost irreversible presence in Nepal's domestic politics also, because it's a cause and effect thing we need to see.
Yubaraj, thank you so much for joining me in what was a fascinating discussion. I hope Indian politicians and and also the powers that be, both in Nepal and India, they sit down and they work things out. The world has become so precarious. There are so many challenges, economic challenges, which have now come on Nepal, on India, on the world. So ours, Nepal and India relations have been so good over hundreds of years, and I think they'll continue.
No, yeah, 200 years, and I believe that it has the two the potential is huge.
In fact, I've traveled extensively in Nepal. I've even been for the Annapurna trek, and it's just such amazing places, and the people are so kind and so good to all of us. I think we just need to continue with that relationship, appreciate continued support. I mean, India and Nepal is it can be an iconic relationship.
Exactly. They could be certainly they could be example. Yeah, they could be examples. Those.
Full of world peace and cooperation. And thank you so much for joining me on AB Decodes. And we look forward to talking to you again very soon.
My pleasure, Arjunji. Thank you for giving me the platform.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.